Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's JD here. Today we're going to be talking about something a little bit more on the controversial side. And we do have a special presentation prepared for today's video. So let's start talking. And today the question is going to be, are you more likely to survive the fall of Constantinople or a 1v1 against Peterbot? Okay, so let's talk about who these people are before we get into it. So, Constantinople is a Byzantine city that existed until it fell on the 29th of May in 1453 after a 53-day siege by the Ottoman Empire. And you may wonder, why did I say 53-day? Well, this is going to get important when we get later on into the power scaling of Peterbot versus the Ottoman Empire's army in 1453. So, let's first talk about who Peterbot is. So Peterbot is a Fortnite player who has won several awards. He's considered the best Fortnite player of all time, and he is a very skilled player. He's very good at many aspects of the game. So in this hypothetical situation, you are placed in a situation where you're given a would you rather by some wizard or something, because obviously this can't happen, because if you did not know, the fall of Constantinople happened quite a few years before Peterbot was born, so that would not be possible. But in this hypothetical situation, you're given the choice, would you rather join the fall of Constantinople? And this is a stipulation where you have to ask, are you an attacker or defender? And when it comes down to it, when we get into the statistics, it doesn't really matter. Or would you kill Peterbot in a 1v1 in Fortnite? Obviously, using the basic lineup of a blue AR, blue pump, and mini shields. So let's go back to the presentation here. Let's look at this slide. Okay, so here are the numbers that we're going to be breaking down. So Constantinople had roughly 120,000 people. Wow. Well, that included around 80,000 attacking Ottomans, 40,000 defending, of which about, I think, 15,000 were soldiers and 25,000 were civilians. And then on the other hand, we have Peterbot's stats from a notable solo cash cup in which he won 4 out of 8 games. And this is notable for several reasons. Okay, first of all, you have to consider the people who are in a cash cup final are going to be roughly the top 0.1% of players, if not much more, because it's very hard to get there. I've never gotten there, and I'm sure you haven't either. And think about this, in the fall of Constantinople, there were 40,000 defending and 8,000 died, not including attackers. Around 50,000 attackers died, which we'll talk about later. In Fortnite, each of those solo cash cup games that Peterbot won, there were 99 defenders, and all 99 of them perished. So, why is this important? Okay, well, let's talk about the numbers difference first of all. So, in Constantinople, the Byzantine were outnumbered pretty roughly. You can see it was around 80k to 40k, and most of those were armed citizens, not even defenders. Whereas in Peterbot's Fortnite games, there are 99 people he has to fight, and he is only one person. So those numbers come out to roughly 297 times the ratio of people for Peterbot in comparison to what the Ottomans had. So in that case, you have to think, well, at least compared to the contemporaries of their time, Peterbot is significantly more skilled than an Ottoman Empire soldier. But the question is, this is on average. You're getting put into the war. Are you going to survive? And the question is, there is more, or not the question, the answer is that there's much more that we need to talk about here. So let's look at this next slide, because this one's going to really pull some things together here. So let's power scale Peterbot, the Fortnite player, versus the Ottoman army when it attacked Constantinople in 1453 and led a 51-year siege on the city. Well, first of all, a 51-year siege is quite a bit longer than Peterbot's entire lifespan of, I think, 17 years, or the entire lifespan of a Fortnite game, which is around 20 minutes. In that time, you could probably have around 100,000 Fortnite games, which is pretty notable because of the fact that Peterbot is getting more reps in than the average Ottoman soldier. So With 80,000 attackers, the Ottoman Empire lost an estimated 50,000 soldiers, which is a pretty large amount of its force. Now, in a Fortnite game, obviously, you can't lose half of yourself and keep the other half alive. While you can lose health, that doesn't count. So, each fallen soldier we're going to consider as roughly a loss proportionally. So, we're going to say they lost 50 out of 80k soldiers, whereas Peterbot only lost 3 out of 8 games, or 4 out of 8 games in this solo cash cup, which gives him a slightly better ratio than the Ottoman Empire. It also, obviously, like we talked about, Peterbot's playing the top 0.1% of players, whereas Constantinople, a lot of the defending Byzantine citizens were just armed citizens, which means that they're not going to have as big of an effect as a solo Cash Cup Finals player would have in comparison to the average Fortnite player. So, yes, Peterbot doesn't even need teammates. He did this all by himself when he got good at Fortnite. Obviously, sometimes he does play duos or trios, but for the sake of this video, we're going to be saying since in a siege, you're mainly focusing on staying alive yourself, that it's very similar to the solos in Fortnite or maybe a Team Rumble, which we're not going to talk about because Peterbot is slightly too good to be considered in a Team Rumble setting. So, lastly, we need to talk about this because as it stands, Peterbot is at a heavy advantage against the Byzantine Empire or the Ottoman army. So, how does this compare to Fortnite? Well, you need to ask, how many mats were used to build Constantinople? And how does Peterbot do in situations where he's down in mats? Well, this is where we have to talk about peace control a little bit, because in the fall of Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire used very little peace control, which is probably why the siege lasted decades upon decades, whereas Peterbot sieges usually only last around 30 seconds until they are already full boxed. Now, you need to ask, does this account for modern technology? And the answer is no, because if you've ever played Fortnite, you will see that there are not any phones and there are not any companies like Apple or Elon Musk. So that means that technology must not be considered in this argument. So that would mean that roughly Peterbot is power equivalent to around, Peterbot is power equivalent to around, let's just say, if we calculate these numbers out, I think that it says that Peterbot is worth roughly 40,000 soldiers in 1453 on the sieging end, and on the defending end, he is worth only about 10,000, which is much less. But you have to consider that these were the times when people were more using Combat Pro over Builder Pro. Builder Pro didn't become popular until the 1700s. So in 1453, when Constantinople fell, it was a primary amount of people were using Combat Pro, which obviously does change how this is going to play out. But to answer the question, what is harder? The answer is it is much harder as an average person to defeat Peterbot in a Fortnite 1v1 than it would be to survive the fall of Constantinople, regardless of what side you are on. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one.